very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. We'll start today with a poem by Rabindranath Tagore and Gitanjali. So the poem goes like this: where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by the narrow domestic walls, where the word comes out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. So I used to learn these poems and then use them as introduction in the essays. For instance, in those essays which talks about freedom, for example, what is freedom according to you? There is some philosophical essay on freedom. So you can start by this poem by saying that freedom is where the mind is not without fear, where knowledge flows freely, where I can hold my head high and walk free without being scared of what will happen to me. So without being scared of, being raped in the streets, and also where freedom means, and also there will be some essays which talks about the vision of India. What do you see, how it should be in the future? So whenever such vision is being asked, you can again start with this, that my vision for India is a day where the mind is not without fear, where the world is not divided into fragments, and it's not just the boundaries between the countries, it is the boundaries mentally as well, and also in the society between the castes and between the people. There are no such walls, where people seek out and respect truth and they speak truth, where people are very dedicated and they work towards perfection, where whatever their actions are, they are guided by reason and not by some stereotype or prejudice. And that is the nation into which I want to wake up one day. So this is what the introduction to such essays could be. So if you find it very difficult to learn the whole essay, I actually enjoyed reading these kind of poems. So for me it was easy. But then if you find it difficult to learn all the stanzas, then you can just learn the first and the last one, so that it makes more sense when you incorporate it as part of the essay. So with this, we will move on to the first topic of the day, is India and BRICS. So the what was there in the news was about the BRICS and India's what India can role that it can play. So in that, the important part was the new development bank has been allocating financial resources to combat COVID-19 crisis. So in which 1 billion emergency loan has been extended to China, and subsequently it was extended to other countries of the BRICS like India, South Africa and Brazil. So in this context, we will try to analyze BRICS and India-BRICS relations. So when we talk about BRICS, we'll talk about the basic things. First, it came after the financial crisis of 2008. So once the financial crisis happened, there were doubts about the sustainability of a dollar-dominated financial system. So therefore, BRICS initially began with an economic agenda where it was focused on just having an alternative financial system to the dollar-denominated financial system. But this economic agenda then gave way to further widening of the scope, which included health, culture, and other areas of cooperation also. So it began with 4 countries in 2009, that is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And in 2010, South Africa was also admitted as a member of the BRICS. So what is its importance is that it comprises of 42% of the world population and also 20% of the world GDP and nearly $4 trillion of foreign reserves. So this shows the importance and the potential that this grouping holds to shape international and domestic policies in the future. So when we talk about the recent development, so there was this BRICS summit, annual summit that happened in Brasilia, Brazil. So this was the 11th BRICS summit that happened. And So what this summit what are all the products of the summit? First is all the countries held that we need to strengthen multilateralism. So multilateralism has to be strengthened. We also need to reform the global institutions like UNSC, World Bank, IMF. So all of these need to be, there has to be reforms in these global institutions. And also there is the new development bank of the BRICS. So a regional office of NDB needs to be opened in India. This was agreed upon, and all the countries also spoke about terrorism, that it is one of the biggest threats that the world is facing, and India held that the world economy is losing nearly $1 trillion annually because of terrorism. So we need to handle this monster evil. And also Russia has proposed the BRICS energy research platform. So energy research platform was proposed by Russia during the Brasilia summit. And also they held that there has to be a creation of a new cryptocurrency also, for a unified payment system was also discussed between the members in this Brasilia summit. So this was the outcome of the Brasilia summit. So you can just whenever you're asked about India and the BRICS relations, you have to mention about the latest summit, and even though it is not asked in the question, many a times you will have to write the outcome of the latest summit. So in which case, in a 15-marker question, if this is the page, you can just make a small box on the side of the answer sheet and just write 5 points which are the main outcomes of the most recent summit. So now we will see the issues which are there with the India's association with the BRICS. So the first thing is that, as we all know, that there is a slowdown. At the outset, there is a global slowdown, but this slowdown also started with the Chinese slowdown. Even South Africa, Brazil, Russia are also facing slowdown. Russia, because sanctions were imposed on it also. So because of this, all the countries of the BRICS are facing slowdown. So to this extent, their economic cooperation and intra-BRICS trade has also been impacted. The second again comes to the trade. We all saw in the previous slide that they account for 42% of the world population and 20% of the world GDP. But however, in spite of that, the intra-BRICS trade is just nearly 17% of the global trade. So the trade itself, the intra-BRIC trade itself is very low because of various tariff and non-tariff barriers. The third is the BRICS came up with a financial alternative. That was the main agenda. The economic agenda was to find an alternative to the Western dominated financial international institutions. So they did find an alternative in the form of New Development Bank. But so far, only the founders of the BRICS are the members of NDB. And NDB has also not been lending much to countries outside of the BRICS. And there is also lack of transparency when it comes to the lending by NDB. Similarly, if you see, China has its own Asia infrastructure, AIIB is also there of China. So this again shows that there is NDB on the one hand, there is AIIB on the other hand. So which one is given predominance? In all this, the role of NDB is getting diluted. So for also for prelims information, you should know that the New Development Bank was, the agreement for it was signed at the Fortaleza Declaration in 2014. So this was where the agreement for forming the NDB was signed. There are also several political issues because the countries that form the BRICS are on different pages. For example, China, as part of the BRICS, says that we need to fight terrorism. But again, China is shielding Pakistan. Similarly, if you see, Brazil and India are democratic countries, but China and Russia are not. Similarly, China and Russia, they are already permanent members of the UNSC. So the other members are not. So China and Russia are not so much inclined towards reforms in UNSC, which the other countries of the BRICS are. So as a solution to this, you can say that we have the BRICS Parliamentarian Forum. So there is a forum called as the BRICS Parliamentarian Forum. This must be used and there must be more coordination and interaction and discussions on this forum, so that more consensus on what kind of policy reforms we need can be brought about. The next issue is the China's role. So China has an overwhelming presence in the particular region because of its economic strength. There is AIIB, there is One Belt, One Road. So China has a lot of initiatives and investments that are going on various countries. And Chinese economy is huge compared to the other economies in the region. So China's overwhelming presence is there, which is crowding the say of the other member countries of the platform. And similarly, when you see that the reason why the BRICS had started was to have that economic agenda, that is to bring about reforms in various international institutions. But they have failed to bring such reforms. Even today, there hasn't been much reforms in IMF, UNSC. So even today, the permanent membership has not been expanded to include the voice of the developing countries, whose population has increased tremendously. So this is another issue that they have failed in their stated agenda. Then another issue is that these countries that form the grouping of BRICS, they have several bilateral tensions. So if we take the example of India, China, you can quote so many issues, so many things on which the two countries have issues. So these will definitely impact our interaction in such regional or global cooperation for us. So there are bilateral tensions as well. So these are some of the issues which India's relation with the BRICS faces. Now let us understand why it is important to overcome all these issues, because what is the significance of BRICS for India? So first the thing is, it is the voice for the developing countries. So it is an example of cooperation of global south, and so that is why this is very important for India. Second, as we can see in the recent years, the global challenges have increased. So it was climate change, and now suddenly the significance of cooperation on health has increased because of the coronavirus pandemic. So such global challenges have increased, and this shows that the countries should cooperate which are facing similar challenges. So because of these challenges, again, we need to cooperate. And the third is counter-terrorism. So these countries are also faced with terrorist attacks, and therefore they have come together in the past as well to cooperate on counter-terrorism. They have been asking for adoption of the counter-terrorism that India has proposed also, so policy. So that is why counter-terrorism is high on their agenda. So BRICS is very important. Then again, the reform agenda with which the BRICS was formed, that is reforming the UNSC, reforming the IMF, this even today has not been achieved. And as long as this basic agenda with which the BRICS was formed remains unfulfilled, the existence and the importance of BRICS will continue to be there. And also we have the SDG goals, in the fulfillment of which the countries can cooperate, share best practices and all that. Now the BRICS has come out with the New Development Bank as an alternative global financial institution to the IMF and the World Bank. So therefore this also, in order to make this popular also, the cooperation among the BRICS countries is very important. So in the light of all this, in 2021 the BRICS summit is scheduled to be in India itself. So this sums up why the BRICS as a platform is very significant for India. Now let's also look at some of the trivia which may be asked in the prelims. So the first is that the first summit of the BRICS was held in 2009, and it was held in Russia. The second thing that you should understand is South Africa was invited in 2010, but there may be a statement that the BRICS was formed in 2009. Yes, correct. Second statement that South Africa became a part of the BRICS in 2010. This is wrong because South Africa was invited in 2010, but the first meeting for the first time it attended was the third BRICS summit in China, which was held in 2011. Though South Africa was invited in 2010, it came for the first meeting in China in 2011. The third thing you must know is the 11th summit that was held in Brasilia, and every summit will have a theme. So many times you can have a prelims question saying that the theme of the 11th BRICS summit is which of the following. So you have to choose a correct answer. So that is why it is important to have an idea about the theme of each important such events or such summits. So the theme for the 11th summit that happened in Brasilia was economic growth for innovative future. So you have to know that economic growth for innovative future. And the 12th summit in 2020 is going to happen in Russia, and there the theme is partnership for global stability, common security, and innovative growth. So there has to be global security, there has to be a common security, and innovative growth. So that is a theme for the 2020 summit. Then there is what is called as the BRICS outreach program. So BRICS outreach program, this was actually started by South Africa in the year 2013. So the main purpose is for the member countries of the BRICS to outreach to the members, to their immediate neighbors. So all of the BRICS member countries will reach out to their neighboring countries, and they try to bring them in platform with the BRICS. So that is the aim of the BRICS outreach program. There's another called as a BRICS Plus approach. What is the difference between BRICS outreach and BRICS Plus is that BRICS outreach aims to reach out to the neighboring countries of the BRICS members, but BRICS Plus program, it aims to reach out to the global, all the countries in the globe, and bring them under the BRICS platform. So this is the major difference. So now let's come to the way forward. So as we have seen that the intra-BRICS trade is just 17% of the global trade. So we need to improve on the trade, investment, and innovation. At the same time, we have new areas of cooperation. Like in the Brasilia declaration, they spoke about the cryptocurrency for a unified payment interface. So this new BRICS cryptocurrency again is a aspect of economic cooperation, which will on which we need further cooperation. Similarly, the coronavirus has shown that pandemics have assumed a very great importance, and it has become a global issue. So on this they can cooperate. And when it comes to the digital world, so India has already held a workshop on digital forensics and also digital health initiative. So in the light of pandemic, this again assumes more importance. So India has already held the digital health summit as part of the Fit India movement. So this again, more cooperation we require in this area in the future. And more importantly, we need to improve the people-to-people ties. So when it comes to people-to-people ties, we can talk about sports, culture, education, film, youth, and so on. And then this time, in the latest declaration, Russia spoke about the energy security and energy research platform. So therefore, energy is an important area where further cooperation should be done. And we were also, the BRICS countries were also talking about a BRICS credit rating agency. So we need further cooperation on this, and this has to see the light of the day soon. So credit rating agency is very important, and we need to move further forward in this. And also, what is more important is that there have been several commitments that these countries committed to in each of these annual summits, but then the follow-up of these commitments had been very poor. So we need to, it is important that rather than new commitments, these countries need to fulfill the existing ones. For example, NDB, they did set up the NDB, but then there is lack of transparency, and there is lack of funding by the NDB to the non-BRICS countries. So we need to rather live upon the commitments that have already been given at the BRICS platform, rather than creating new commitments at every summit. So this again is very important, and we need to have some focus areas, like even the counter terrorism is, it will always remain importance forever. Climate change again will be important forever, and the global institutional architecture and its reforms will definitely be important. And also, after the pandemics, the corona crisis, we are standing at a situation where everybody is doubting the multilateral nature of the world tomorrow, that countries will be turning inside, and it's an end to globalization and all that. So at this point, how would be the reformed multilateralism? That again is a matter which these countries can come together and discuss. So on these lines, we can tell the way forward. Now we'll go to the next topic. So there was some very important data on agriculture. So it is said that the agriculture sector grew by 11.3% at the current prices, whereas the overall annual GDP grew at just 7.9%. So, but what again is very important to understand is this growth is measured at current prices. Current price means and constant price. Current price means that you are measuring the growth of something without adjusting it to inflation. But constant price means you are measuring the growth while adjusting to inflation. So the growth could possibly be because of rise in the inflation. The growth, India's agriculture growth grew by 11.3%, which means that this growth could have also been because the prices of the agricultural goods increased and not because the agricultural output as such increased. So this factor should be kept in mind. But in any case, the agriculture sector grew at 11.3%, but the GDP itself annually grew by just 7.9%. And also, it is the first time since 1980-81 when the farm sector growth has exceeded that of the non-farm sector growth by a wide margin. And this observation was made by the Niti Aayog member Ramesh Chand. And also you should know that Mr. Ramesh Chand is an agricultural economist. So the other day I was telling you about the importance of quoting the names of relevant personalities in the answer. For instance, when it comes to agriculture, you can quote Mr. Swaminathan, Mr. Ashok Gulati, and similarly you can quote Mr. Ramesh Chand whenever you talk about some reforms in the agriculture. So this again is very important. So next is another piece of data. So a NABARD survey that happened in 2016 and 17, it showed that 43% of the average monthly income of the agricultural households comes from cultivation. So which means the remaining is coming from non-farm activities. This data points to the fact that how remunerative agriculture has been to the farmers. So just 43% of the income of the families, agricultural families, is they are getting from cultivation. The rest are coming from non-labor, which mainly includes the wage labor. So this you can talk about while you may have questions like there have been talks about doubling of farmer incomes, for which a committee was also set up under Mr. Ashok Dalwai. So in that case, in such a backdrop, how important is it to realize this goal of doubling of farmer incomes? In such questions, you can quote the NABARD survey and you can draw such pie charts and show that cultivation is actually contributing to 43% of their average monthly income, but the rest is coming from non-farm activities, mainly the wage labor. So this shows that agriculture has not been that remunerative to the farmers who are carrying out agriculture. So this is very important data. Other basic stuff is like agriculture employs nearly 53% of the workforce but contributes only 17.5% of GDP. So this shows two things. One is the heavy dependence of the workforce on agriculture, so agriculture being the backbone of the economy. And second thing, it shows how agriculture is not being able to add value to our national income, so just contributing 17.5% of GDP. So similarly, when we talk about the issues that is facing the agriculture, one is the excessive dependence on agriculture. Second is that poor value addition, because of which only 17.5% of GDP is its contribution. The third is that there is a lot of land fragmentation. So just 86% of the land holdings are 86% of the land holdings are less than 2 hectares. So this shows the severe land fragmentation and the very small size of the land. So this in turn brings us to the other issue that when the land parcels are so small, it is not possible to deploy technology and mechanize the farms. So mechanization of farms is not possible, and there is no economies of scale also. And the next important challenge that agriculture is facing is the institutional credit, lack of institutional credit. So the next data says that 40% of the loans the farmers have taken from informal sources like money lenders, family shopkeepers, etc. So this makes them indebted to these money lenders who charge extremely high interest rates, and this has even led to farm suicides. So the lack of institutional credit and the growth in such institutional credit is also an important challenge that the agriculture is facing. And this data shows how agriculture has also gone into the negative growth territory in 2014-15. It was minus 0.2% was the growth. And the next thing, the challenge that agriculture is facing is the challenge of globalization. So before globalization, our import was 2.8% and our export was 18.5%. But after globalization, our imports increased to 4.2%. So we have been importing more, and our exports, which should have been more after globalization, has actually reduced to 12.5%. So this has been the negative impact of globalization on Indian agriculture. So whenever you are asked even a question on globalization, that what was good and bad about globalization, in the bad you can definitely say that it hit our agricultural sector, and quote this statistic. Alright, so there was another article, and this article was written by M.S. Swaminathan himself. So the rest of the content of the article was the same. The article spoke about food security and nutritional security, which I have already discussed in detail in the previous videos. So one thing that struck me in this is M.S. Swaminathan says that it is very important to have a value addition in agriculture. So today it is able to contribute just 17.5% to the GDP is because there is poor value addition in the agriculture sector. So he emphasizes the importance of value addition in the primary products. So he quotes the example of Rice Biopark in Myanmar. So it is Rice Biopark in Myanmar. So here the straw, bran and the entire biomass is utilized. So in India he compares it to the Amul model also, where there is a lot of value addition. So that can actually improve the income. So just now we spoke about the Ashok Dalwai committee and doubling of farmers' income. So this will require a lot of value addition to be done for the primary products of agriculture. So in this regard, so whenever you're talking about this, you can quote M.S. Swaminathan, and you can also give the example of Rice Biopark of Myanmar. So that is how we have to improve value addition to the primary agricultural products even in India to be able to make the agriculture itself more remunerative, because in the previous slide itself we saw that only 43% of the average monthly income of the farmers comes from cultivation. So next is about China and India comparison data. So while we were talking about BRICS, we discussed one issue which was the overwhelming presence of China. So in this regard, we had discussed that Chinese economy is very huge compared to the other economies making the BRICS. So here you can see that in 1982, in 1980, China was the 48th largest economy in the world, and in 1982, India's and China's GDP were comparable at $200 billion. But today, the Chinese GDP is 13.6 trillion. Chinese economy is 13.6 trillion, while India's economy is 2.7 trillion. In 2018, China attracted 203 billion worth of foreign direct investment, while India got how much? While India got just $42 billion of foreign direct investment. So this is the compare and contrast figure that you can use while writing such answers, which shows about the difference in the sizes of our economies and how far we need to go to meet China. So next is a little answer writing tip which talks about the importance of stories. So for example, in this the story is about a migrant in the current corona crisis. Jamalo Makdam, of 12 years, died while walking back from the chilly fields of Telangana to her home in Chhattisgarh. She and a group of other workers decided to return home on foot, as many migrant workers did, after losing their jobs, incomes, and even accommodation because of the lockdown policy. So her journey ended in death, possibly because of electrolyte imbalance, exhaustion, the health officials have said. So this paints the grim picture of the status of migrant workers in India. So whenever you may be starting an essay which talks about the increased migration in India and the impact or anything, so in that cases it's always very powerful to start with a story. I have given another example here which took place a couple of years before, where a person, Dana Maji from Kalahandi, which is one of the very backward district of Odisha, his wife died in a hospital, and there was not even an ambulance facility or anything to take the dead body back to his village. So his wife died in the district hospital, and he couldn't even take the body home. So he walked for over 10 kilometers with the dead body on his shoulders. So this paints a very bad picture about the healthcare and health infrastructure in India. So whenever you talk about any essay on health, so starting the essay with such touching stories is going to increase the impact that it has on the reader. So similarly, a few years back, you had seen the picture of a small 5-year-old kid, Alan Kurdi, on the who was dead, and his face was buried in the sand at the seashore. So this shows how severe the Syrian crisis, Syrian issue was. So that is how the impact of story is. So whenever you start an essay, you can start with these kind of impactful stories, so that it helps the examiner, evaluator to have an emotional connect with your essay. So the next topic is India's role in the post-COVID world. So this article was written by Chinoy sir, who is India's ambassador, who had been India's ambassador, and he gives certain steps that India can take in the post-COVID world at the international level. So what will be India's role at the international level in the post-COVID world? What leadership role should India play? So in this, the first thing he says is that the corona crisis was said to have originated from the wet markets of Wuhan, so where these exotic wild animals are slaughtered and their meat is sold. So that is why the ambassador recommends that efforts must be made to strengthen a convention called as CITES. CITES is a convention on international trade in endangered species of wild flora and fauna. So he says that this convention has to be strengthened. Plus, this convention talks only about the international trade in endangered species. Rather, this convention should be expanded to even include the hazardous exploitation of exotic wildlife species even within the national borders. So even within a country, their transportation and exploitation will have to be controlled. And even China, India, there are 180 member countries of this particular convention. We all must pass a legislation that controls domestic consumption of such species. So this is the first thing we can do. In this regard, India can take the leadership role to strengthen this, to apply for even the domestic borders. So there also it can apply, and in this regard, India can take the leadership role. The second, the ambassador argues, is that the second thing that's important is looking at the number of deaths that happen in the United States. It's very important that just because you have money, you cannot win over this crisis. So the coronavirus has killed even some of the most affluent peoples. So what is more important is not money, but rather immunity. So the people who have higher immunity levels have a better chance of survival. So that is why in the ancient Indian tradition, we have Ayurveda, yoga. They all are known to boost immunity levels in the body and make us healthy. So this is already May, and on June 21st, the International Yoga Day is also coming. So India can take the leadership role to further reinforce the worldwide practice of yoga and to make it even more popular at the world level, so that it can promote holistic health to everybody. So this is the second thing. As a in the sphere of health, what India play the role. The third role that India can play is even during the crisis, India acted as a good Samaritan by exporting the drug hydroxychloroquine to United States and other countries. So in this, by this act, it has shown the ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So India is already called as the pharmacy of the world, and even in the future, with its emphasis on important and cheaper but high quality drugs, it can play a leadership role at the international level to drive the drugs and the pharmacy sector. And already the Indian pharmacy sector is performing a good role in various developing countries. So its penetration across the world at the international level is one another thing that India can play the role in post the COVID crisis. The fourth role that India can play is in the Biological Weapons Convention of 1975. So some people have even argued that this coronavirus actually originated in a laboratory in Wuhan. Irrespective of whether this is right or wrong, but a Biological Weapons Convention this can become a reason why biological weapons convention can be strengthened. So this provides an opportune moment, and this particular convention can be strengthened. Why? Because the biological weapons convention, there is no verification protocol where countries are verified whether are they manufacturing any biological weapons or not. There is no verification protocol. So India can play a leadership role in strengthening this biological weapons convention to incorporate a verification protocol so as to ensure that no countries are manufacturing any biological weapons. So this is another area where India can take a leadership role at the national level. The fifth area where India can play a leadership role is in artificial intelligence and the digital space. So already several countries are relying on artificial intelligence, surveillance technology, big data and data mining. So in this, India can double its efforts, and it has to, at this point of time, India can push for a multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. So India can push for a multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. So this is another area where it can play a role. So these are the roles where India can play at the leadership role at the international level, and the kind of reforms that India can push for after the COVID crisis. So next is an example of man-animal conflict where wild elephants killed cattle near the Kaundinya Wildlife Sanctuary. So you have to have some examples where man-animal conflicts are happening so that you can quote them in your answers. So this is one example where the wild elephants have killed the cattle in the Kaundinya Wildlife Sanctuary. So now we will discuss Friday's question. The question was to discuss B.R. Ambedkar's views on equality in the society. So when we come to the views of B.R. Ambedkar, first of all, he has always held that there has to be equality in the society and there must not be any discrimination on whatever grounds. So firstly, he says that he believes that one equality is because the behavior of the people has to be moral and ethical. He believes in the moral and ethical behavior of people because he feels once they have moral and ethical behavior, then there is no way that they can treat people unequally. So he first of all emphasizes on ethical behavior of people. Once people start behaving ethically, there is no way they can treat people differently. Second thing is, apart from political democracy, he also emphasized on socio-economic democracy. So it is not just enough to have universal adult franchise where everybody is given the right to vote, but it's equally important that there is equality in the social sphere where based on the gender or based on caste, there are no discrimination, and also economically that everybody has equal access to the financial opportunities. So this also is very important. This is what he says, that democracy is not just political, but it should also be socio-economic. The third thing he says that is there has to be an international solidarity when it comes to fighting social inequality. So he compares the way untouchables are treated in India with the position of the Negroes in Americas. So he says that there has to be international solidarity whenever we are combating a social inequality. So this is what he says. The fourth thing that he says is he believes in the idea of a good society. So he says a good society is one that is based on liberty, equality and fraternity. By saying good society, he says that democracy that India followed is not just the end. It's not that you achieve democracy at the end, but it's also important to ensure that democracy is the means also. Even when you want to reach this end, reach the goal, the means adopted must also be very democratic. So when you say that the means must be democratic, it means that the concept of good society, equality should be there. So this was his concept. And then he also told that there are several human rights, and to enforce these human rights, several laws are also made, but then these laws are not enforced. So it is very important that these laws which are formulated to ensure human rights are given to people are enforced properly. For example, Dr. Ambedkar led a satyagraha wherein people tried to gain access to water from a tank. So there was actually a law that was enacted by the Bombay legislature that every people should have equal access to the tank, but then because of social sanctions it was not enforced. So his satyagraha was even met by violence, and he said that it's very important to not just have the law, but to also somehow ensure that these laws are enforced. He then says that the divisions in the society is not just between the castes but also within the castes. He not just spoke about social equality in terms of different castes, but he spoke about social equality even within the castes. For example, even within the Dalits, he noticed that not everybody was treated equally even among the Dalits. So he said that even there has to be intra-caste equality and unity. So he wanted to build a broader platform for all Dalits, and he attempted to include even the non-Mahar Dalit castes into his organizations, like the All India Scheduled Caste Federation, the Independent Labour Party, and all that. So he even dealt with the intra-caste equality. All right, so the next thing is that he believed education is a very important tool to ensure that there is equality in the society. So for this purpose, he even formulated the Bahishkrit Hitkarni Sabha to spread education among the marginalized and so as to improve their economic conditions. So he even gave the slogan that educate, agitate, and organize. So he realized the importance education can have on uplifting the social status of the backward communities. The next thing is he believed that the governments have a very important role in eradicating inequalities. So even as the Constituent Assembly debates, he focused on equal civic rights and right to vote for all, freedom of religion, and legal prohibition of discrimination and forced labor and all that. So to protect these fundamental rights. So he felt that the government has a very important role to ensure that all the people are treated equally. He even believed that there has to be a change in the hierarchical structure of the Indian society. The Varnashram is not just giving rise to a division of the labor in India, it is giving rise to a division of laborers in India. So the Varnashram is actually creating more dissensions in the Indian society, and this hierarchical structure should not be there in the Indian society. He also even spoke about the religious scriptures. He says that they have to be logically interpreted, and where they are promoting discrimination, that part of the religious scripture, it is better to discard them. So that is what he told, and he even spoke that as long as there is caste, there is going to be caste system. So therefore, we need to completely annihilate the concept of caste system completely. So that these were the views of Ambedkar on equality. So give an apt conclusion and end your answer. So let's see today's question. Discuss the reasons for the rise in man-animal conflict in India, which is a 10-mark question for 150 words. And in the previous question, as I said, you can give an apt conclusion to your answer. Always remember that in such types of personalities, while you're dealing with the answer, in the conclusion part, you have to include the relevance of their teachings or the relevance of their views in the current world. How B.R. Ambedkar's views on equality are very relevant even today to tackle the inequalities in the Indian society. On these lines, you have to conclude the answer. So please do make a mental frame of this particular question. So that's it for today. Thank you.